Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. Sometimes we Christians worry about things. I guess all people worry about things. You know, most of the things we worry about never happen. But once in a while, the things you worry about happen. Paul had been warned time and again not to go to Jerusalem after his third missionary journey. They said danger awaits there. You're going to be bound. You're going to be handed over to Gentiles. Paul went to Jerusalem anyway. And the thing that people worried about happened. In Acts chapter 21, Paul ends up in Jerusalem. He's greeted warmly by the other Christians. But when you get to Acts 21, verse 27, when the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia who had seen him in the temple stirred up all the crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching men everywhere against the people and the law in this place. Moreover, he also brought Greeks into the temple, and he has defiled the holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Some things you need to understand about that temple, the location, what's going to happen here. The temple is the sort of crowning glory of the city of Jerusalem at that time, built by Herod the Great. White marble, overlaid with gold, beautiful place. But it was a place of increasing exclusiveness. The Gentiles could go into the big outer court. Jews could go into the next court, and there was a sign up there that said Gentiles entered there under penalty of death. And then the next court, only Jewish males could go, and then in the building itself, only the priests could go, and in the very back room of the building, what we know as the Holy of Holies, only the high priest could go in once a year. So the closer you got to what they considered the presence of God, or the place where God dwelt, the Holy of Holies, the fewer people could go there. The charge that the Jews are bringing in grabbing Paul, actually it's not a charge yet, it's just a mob action, is that he brought a Gentile into that court of Israel, into that court where only Jews could go. Well, the temple sits on top of this hill, and right next to it, with 4 towers up over the wall of the temple, is the Fortress Antonia. That's the Roman garrison in Jerusalem. Two of these towers looked right down into the temple. And probably the Romans built it that way because they knew if any trouble would start in Jerusalem, it probably was going to start in the temple. So Paul is grabbed by the Jews. This mob action begins, and pretty soon the soldiers pour out of the Fortress Antonia into the temple and rescue Paul. Paul then takes a little bit of time to address them, to talk to them about what this is all about. And at the end of his speech in verse 22 of chapter 22, up to this word they listened to him. Then they lifted up their voices and say, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he ought not to live." And as they cried out and waved their garments and threw dust into the air, that apparently was a sign of disgust, the tribune commanded him to be brought into the barracks and ordered him to be examined by scourging to find out why they shouted thus against him. Examined by scourging was not a fun thing. You would be tied to a pole and somebody would whip you until you would tell them what they wanted to hear. Well, when they tied him with the thongs, we're told, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who's a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" I love the casual way he does that. First, he lets them tie him up. And then when they're about to whip him, he says, let's talk about a point of law here. Can you scourge a Roman citizen? Well, Paul knows the answer, and so does the centurion who's about to lay the lashes to his back. No, you can't. When the centurion heard that, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man's a Roman citizen." So the tribune came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And Paul said, "Yes." The tribune answered, "I bought this citizenship for a large sum." Paul said, "Hey, I was born a citizen." That actually probably made him a little higher ranking citizen even than the Roman who was about to scourge him. So they say, hey, this is not a good idea to take a Roman citizen and do this to him, and so they do not beat Paul on that occasion. Paul does get an opportunity now to talk before the Jewish council. And as things get hot and heavy, one of the things that Paul does at that time is he leans back on his Pharisee background. In verse 6 of chapter 23, he's before the Jewish council. Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees. Now, Sadducees, one of their big points of contention, Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. And Pharisees believed that there was a physical resurrection at the end of this age. So when he looks out at the Sanhedrin, or the council, and he says, part of these guys are Pharisees and part of these guys are Sadducees, he cried out to the council, "Brethren, I'm a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees, with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead, I'm on trial." And he throws the whole council just into a mess. Gets them arguing with each other. Now, I don't know. You could argue, I suppose, that maybe Paul shouldn't have done that and should have taken the opportunity to witness to the gospel. He doesn't really do that. I think he sees the situation as hopeless at this point, and he says, my best way out of this mess, is to get them fighting with each other. So that's what he does. We're going to leave Paul there for now. We'll come back and carry it through next week and see how he continues to work with the political system, both the Hebrew political system and the Roman political system. There are many Christians today that think we ought to be totally separate from the government. Paul relies on the government for his protection in this case, and he is fairly proud of his Roman citizenship as well, and uses that to his advantage in this situation. We'll watch that as we go through future lessons.